Welcome to Story Starters. Every week, we're going to be reading a book that either takes place in the continent of the week or was written by an author that's from the continent of the week. So this week, we're doing Africa. So I have a Nigerian author who is writing this book based on Nigerian culture. The book is Ikenga by Nnedi. Okorafor. So I'll read the first chapter, and then at home, if you want to, you can pull out drawing or painting supplies if you'd like. I know when I was younger, I loved just doodling pictures while I was listening to reading, and sometimes I would doodle pictures that were inspired by the story that I was listening to. Sometimes I'd just paint or color or do something that didn't really relate to the story, but just to keep my hands busy while I listened, and it helped me focus and listen. So if you're like that, you can definitely grab some paint or coloring, or if you like doing the coloring books, the adult coloring books, that type of thing, mandalas. But if you just want to sit and listen, that is totally fine as well. So Ikenga. Chapter 1. A Sad Farewell with Pepper. Nnedi didn't want to look at his father's body in the casket, so he looked at the side of his mother's face instead. He sat beside her, his relatives all around him. He wanted to hold his mother's hand, but he didn't dare. Her black head wrap was perched on her head, all sharp, starched angles. Auntie Ogochi, his mother's sister, had helped her put it on. If it weren't for Auntie Ogochi, his mother would have stayed in bed sobbing. Nnedi's eyes fell on his mother's gold earrings. She only wore these on special occasions. Nnedi figured the burial of his father was special enough. He stared at his mother now, and she didn't notice. Her face was a terrible mess. Her dark brown eyes were red and puffy. Her black mascara was running down her cheeks, and her nose was wet with tears and snot. The handkerchief someone had given her was soaked through with tears. My husband, Iwo, 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 she kept whispering as she gazed at the body of Nnedi's father. He was yards away, lying in an open ebony casket under the black tent next to the high-reaching palm tree that grew beside the house. He was dressed in his impeccable police chief uniform, the same type of uniform he'd been wearing on the night he died, except this one didn't have 3 holes in the chest and back. The murder of Nnedi's father exactly 2 weeks ago was still unsolved. The sun was especially harsh today, and even under the tent it was swelteringly hot. The humid heat blew as a wave of grief passed down on Nnedi's shoulders. He ran his hand over his freshly trimmed rough hair and turned from his mother to look somewhere else. For a while, he watched the woman with the drums perform the burial dance before him. They wore matching blue dresses and cowrie shells that clicked on their ankles. As they danced, they kicked up dust. The band had a guitar and a bass player, a flutist, and 3 more drummers, and they played a variety of songs from high life to traditional. Normally, Nnedi would have enjoyed the music. Suddenly, all the dancers missed their rhythm. The drummers lost their beat. The guitarist's fingers slipped, and the flutists missed their notes. All Nnedi's relatives, family, friends, acquaintances, the 200 people sitting on the benches, standing and crying in the large, spacious compound, all looked towards the entryway on the left side. Auntie Ogochi leaned towards his mother's ear and Nnedi heard her mutter, "This man has no shame." His mother snatched Nnedi's hand and squeezed hard. "Keep playing, keep dancing," she barked at the musicians and dancers. A drummer beat out a floundering rhythm, and the dancers moved distractedly. Nnedi didn't want to look. He knew who he'd see. "Never shy away from conflict," his father had once told him. "Look it in the eye and deal with it." And his mother had stood behind his father and added, "Courage, my son. Your father means you should have courage, but be smart about it." So Nnedi turned to look. He saw a procession of 10 fashionably dressed, gold and diamond wearing, attention usurping women and men filing into the compound. Nnedi tried to stand up straight with his chin up, as his father would have, but instead, fear made him slump in his seat and barely lift his head. Nnedi remembered his father angrily talking about these individuals. "Everyone knows who they are, but people are too afraid to confront them. If anything, people treat them like Nollywood movie stars." These were the most prominent criminals in Caleria. That regal old woman wearing the red abaya textile clothing had to be Mama Go-Slow. His father was right. Indeed, she did walk like a buffalo, and her expensive outfit was thrown off balance by her signature wide, blocky black shoes. The man in the suit that was too big for his skinny frame must be Never Die, the thief who had been shot by the police many times but remained alive. Nnedi was also sure he spotted Bad Market and 3 Days' Journey, too. All of them were strutting like celebrities on the red carpet when they were actually unwanted guests at the chief of police's burial service. Leading the procession was an expensively dressed man who was even shorter than Nnedi. Nnedi's stomach dropped and his hands grew cold. The man looked more like a movie star than any of the others. He was handsome and carried himself like he expected the world to bow at his feet. This was the very man most, including Nnedi, believed was responsible for his father's murder. The chief of chiefs. If he hadn't been the one to pull the trigger, he'd certainly paid and ordered someone to do it. The problem was, there was no proof. No gun registration, no witnesses, no confessions, nothing. It was as if a ghost had shot his father and then fled back to the spirit world to laugh about it. But truth outshone evidence, and Nnedi knew. Everyone knew. And though he'd never seen the chief of chiefs with his own eyes, he was sure this was him right now, waltzing into his father's funeral with the confidence of a ghost. Nnedi pressed against his mother as she squeezed his hand harder. The chief of chiefs was the smallest grown man Nnedi had ever seen, but he knew that this guy was the biggest crime lord in all of Caleria, maybe even in all of southeastern Nigeria. Caleria was a small suburb of Owerri, so this didn't make the chief of chiefs anywhere as infamous as the greatest crime lords in the megacity of Lagos. However, the chief of chiefs certainly dined with and had the ear of those big Lagos men. There were so many crazy rumors about this guy. Some said that he owned huge homes on every continent, all bought with his dirty money, that he was so filthy rich that he bathed with soap made from crushed pink diamonds, that he was so successful in his criminal activity that he was the descendant of a demon and Mamiwata, the water goddess, and that at night he slept with earplugs in his ears because the sound of the stars twinkling kept him up. Nnedi didn't believe any of this, but that didn't make the man any less creepy. Nnedi's father had been a good chief of police. Many times, the wives and mothers of people who his father had helped came to the house bearing gifts. Nnamdi would eavesdrop from the kitchen as these women thanked his father, while his mother brought iced tea or orange Fanta to drink. "Thank you, sir," one of the women sobbed. Thieves had once gutted her house when she was on vacation. Angry and disgusted, Nnamdi's father had personally investigated and pursued the case, and then he and a team of officers apprehended the thieves. "These stupid thieves are so cruel. These stupid thieves are so cruel. You have the brave heart of a lion." The next day, the story was all over Calaria's popular newsletter, the Calaria Sun, and Nnamdi had gone to school so proud that day. Nnamdi's father refused all bribes, and his efforts were starting to result in a decrease in petty crime in Calaria. He'd just turned his efforts towards the chief of chiefs, the apex of the town's crime. His father came home one evening so excited. He talked about a big meeting he'd called at the department. He'd drawn charts on the dry erase board as officers threw out ideas, and the department put together a great plan that would target each of the chief of chiefs' main cohorts while diplomatically approaching the chief of chiefs. His father and the infamous chief of chiefs had sat down in the police station to discuss the compromise. Even the press was invited to witness this. The resulting news article was titled, "The Meeting of Two Chiefs." During this meeting, the chief of chiefs promised to turn his energy towards combating the growing crime and corruption in Calaria instead of fueling it. "You cannot build a palace in a ghetto," the chief of chiefs had been quoted saying. There was even a photo of the two men grinning and shaking hands. 2 nights later, his father was murdered. Father would want to spit at all these stupid people, Nnamdi thought. Everyone in the compound was staring at the chief of chiefs and his entourage. They breathed through their mouths and stood or sat frozen, as if they'd forgotten who they were. Idiots, Nnamdi thought. Such a disgrace to stare like this. He frowned when he realized he too was staring. He closed his mouth. Nearby, one of his uncle's wives was carrying her newborn, and the child screeched. The sound made Nnamdi's heart jump. It reminded him of his mother's blood-curdling scream when the police had told her his father had been killed. But first, there was the bloody letter on the night of his father's murder. Nnamdi shuddered. It was a Friday night, around 8 o'clock, the time when his father usually came home. There was a loud knock on the door. Odd, Nnamdi thought. His father had his own keys, of course. When Nnamdi opened the door, he saw a letter on the ground. His name was printed on the envelope, so he picked it up and tore it open. He found a piece of paper, which he unfolded. His entire body went numb. The writing on the paper was brown red, not black or blue. Nnamdi blinked. He knew exactly what he was seeing, but it took several moments to fully register. The letter was written in blood, and he wanted to drop it like a poisonous spider. Nothing written in blood could be good, especially when you were the son of the chief of the police. He read, "When you dine with the devil, bring a long spoon. Tell your mother that your father's spoon was too short. Sincerely, the chief of chiefs." Nnamdi stood there, reading the letter over and over. As he read, the night grew darker, a shadow descending over him. He quickly looked up, breathing hard, sure someone was there. But he was alone. His father had told him before that the chief of chiefs was dangerous, powerful, and clever. When Nnamdi had asked for more details about him, his father always looked very sad, shook his head, and said, "Someday, but not today." And now this super dangerous man not only knew who Nnamdi was, but he'd written him a letter. He remembered looking out into the night, wondering if the chief of chiefs was hiding out there. too small to spot, deadly, like the most venomous snake. "What is that?" his mother had asked, coming up behind him and taking the letter. As she read it, Mr. Oke, the lanky old gateman, came running from his post, accompanied by Constable Okuru. "I'm sorry, so sorry, Ma," Okuru said, his beret clutched to his chest. "Your husband has been shot. He is dead." That was when Namdi's mother had screamed, the terrible scream that still haunted his nightmares. According to lab test results, the letter had been written in goat's blood. The next day, his father's death was front-page news in the Kalaria Sun. Nnedi and his mother were appalled to see that the newsletter printed the Chief of Chiefs' words, even including a photo of the actual letter. To add insult to injury, Nnedi was quoted in the article. "I'm terrified," the 11-year-old son of murdered police chief Egbuche Icheteka said. Nnedi was so mortified that he'd broken out into a cold sweat after reading it, and then had hidden in his room that entire day. Police officers and investigators had come to their house the night of the shooting to ask questions. A man in jeans and a t-shirt had asked Nnedi how he felt about the letter from the Chief of Chiefs. How was Nnedi supposed to know the guy was a reporter? Now Nnedi watched as the Chief of Chiefs chatted with the guests at his father's burial. His entourage of criminals was like a cackle of hyenas come to laugh at the corpse of a fallen lion. "I can't believe it," Nnedi thought, fire burning in his chest. After a few minutes, the Chief of Chiefs approached Nnedi and his mother. Nnedi forced himself to move from behind to stand beside her. Every nerve on his body tensed, and he felt sweat trickling down his face into his collar. He clenched his stomach muscles and hands to try to stop shaking, but it was no use. The Chief of Chiefs was dressed in an immaculate flowing white agbada that made him look like a rolling snowball, and white trousers with golden cuffs. On his feet, he wore white designer slippers that looked like they were made from clouds. If it wasn't for his long, well-oiled black goatee and gold-rimmed glasses, he could have passed for an overdressed child. Nnedi blinked. The man's short stature had blinded his perception for a moment. The Chief of Chiefs was no stylish child, he reminded himself. And that was when his eyes fell on the Chief of Chiefs' right hand. On his wrist, he wore a white gold watch, but on his right index finger, Nnedi's heart jumped, unable to tear his eyes from the heavy gold ring. Horror descended on him as he felt warm wetness in his pants. "Oh my God," he thought, but he couldn't stop it from happening. He urinated on himself. He wanted to run into the house, but instead he froze. Thankfully, he was wearing a long black kaftan and black pants. Nnedi knew the ring was heavy because he'd held it before. It was solid gold and in the shape of a dragon eating its own tail, an Ouroboros. He knew all this because it was his father's ring. His father had had that ring since starting as a police officer 25 years ago. Nnedi had asked his father about it, and had even tried it on a few times. It had his father's name engraved on the inside. Nnedi frowned, his face hot and his wet pants itchy and cold. He glanced at where his father lay, but he couldn't bring himself to go and see if the ring was still on his finger. "We've come to pay our utmost respects to Chief Egbuche Icheteka," the Chief of Chiefs said to Nnedi's mother. The man spoke with the clarity of a professor. "We're very sorry for your loss." He held out a fat envelope to Nnedi's mother. She glanced at it with a pinched face and flared nostrils. Nnedi held his breath. He only saw this look when his mother was about to lose her temper. Nnedi's Auntie Aguchi quickly reached forward and took the envelope. She opened it and glanced inside. Nnedi leaned forward to see. The envelope was packed with money. Nnedi shivered and became more aware of the wetness, making his legs itchy. In a few minutes, he'd start to stink. I have to get out of here, he thought. Thank you, Auntie Yagochi quickly said, placing a hand firmly on Nnedi's mother's shoulder. His mother softly hissed, biting her lip. My sister is too distraught to speak. That is understandable, the chief of chiefs said. Such a great man, shot down in the prime of his life. What will become of our Caleria? Nnedi's stomach churned with acid. The envelope was probably filled with thousands of naira, and maybe even euros or American dollars. This man had killed his father, and now he was showering his mother with money. Nnedi balled his fists, imagining punching the chief of chief in his face. His legs tensed as he considered kicking him in the privates. But instead, Nnedi held himself still, squeezing his mother's hand. He bit his lip hard as he watched the chief of chiefs amble off and mingle with some of Nnedi's aunts and even members of the police department. His uncle Ike even hugged the chief of chiefs and began talking animatedly with him, as if he were privileged to get the chief's attention. How could any of them speak with him? At his father's funeral? How could his auntie not let his mother tell the man off? What was wrong with everyone? But Nnedi himself also said nothing. Look at me, he thought, tears blurring his vision. Daddy would be ashamed. The moment his mother started talking to his aunt, he made for the house. You won't get away with this, Chief, he thought to himself as he threw open the door. None of you will. You will all be rotting in jail or dead by this time next year. He had no idea what he was saying or what he'd do, but he'd do something. Just before going inside, he turned around and looked across the compound towards the tent where his father's body lay. Tears cooled his face. In the back of his mind, a snide voice said, Stop talking big words. You think you're one of the superheroes in your comic books? Those are just simple, idealistic stories, and you're just a child. A hand fell on his shoulder and he jumped. The tension eased as he turned to see that it was his Uncle Innocent. Nnedi quickly wiped his wet face and tried to blink away his tears. I know how you feel, Uncle Innocent said softly, but take comfort. God will punish them. That night, Nnedi's mother was too upset to notice more than her own tears, but Nnedi was alert. He noticed 3 things were missing. There had been at least 1 can of tomato paste in the kitchen cupboard. Nnedi remembered because his mother had mentioned that she wanted to go to the market for more as soon as everything settled down. It had been in the top right cupboard. It wasn't there anymore. And in the bathroom, the glass apple that sat on the toilet's tank was gone. His father had hated that apple and was always complaining about it. Whenever he saw it, his father humphed with irritation and said in his deep, gruff voice, What is the point of an apple made of glass? As a way to playfully annoy his father, Nnedi's mother had placed the glass apple on the tank of the toilet. Now it was gone. And then there was that red pillow that his mother loved to put behind her back when she sat in the chair in the bedroom. It wasn't memorable in any way. It was exceptionally lumpy. It wasn't exceptionally lumpy, nor was it pretty or ugly. It wasn't given to her by anyone special. It wasn't very old or very new. It was just a pillow, and it was gone. Who had taken these little things? Nnedi was sure he knew. He was positive. The whole compound had been full of criminals. The thief was one of them. Maybe Mama Go Slow or Never Die or 3 Days Journey. But certainly it was upon the orders of the chief of chiefs. Stealing insignificant things from the house of the police chief he just murdered was icing on the cake. Nevertheless, for now, Nnedi knew he and his mother had to just make it to tomorrow without his father. And that's the end of chapter 1, so I will stop there. So again, the book for today that I was reading from is called Ikenga by Nnedi Okorafor. And we have this book at the library if you'd like to check it out and find out what happens and how the story ends.